Today, I am starting a new book called How to Do Life by Traleg Kyabgon Rinpoche. And there is a lot in this book, a lot of very practical information. I'm going to start with a brief summary of the biography that is in the beginning of the book about Traleg Kyabgon Rinpoche. He was born in Tibet in 1955, and in 2 years of his birth, he was identified by the 16th Karmapa as the rebirth of Traleg Rinpoche, and his traditional role was the abbot of Trangu Monastery. So he was brought there, first of all, and this is where Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was and Trangu Rinpoche. It's my understanding that, well, the monastery is called Trangu Monastery, that a previous Trangu gave the monastery to a previous Traleg Rinpoche. And that's why he was the abbot, as opposed to Trangu Rinpoche, who was there already and much older than him. So 2 years after that, in 1959, everybody fled because of the Chinese. And in the group was Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche and Trangu Rinpoche, along with Traleg Rinpoche, many other monks, and some lay people. I think it was a group of close to 150 refugees. And they eventually made it to, I think it was Bhutan. And eventually he made it to Sikkim and stayed with the 16th Karmapa at Rumtek. And there were other of these, they're called tulkus, these identified lamas that are young and are undergoing training. So with him was Taisito Rinpoche, Jamgon Khamtrul III, and many others. And he received personal instruction from the 16th Karmapa and studied with some very good teachers there at the monastery. And being a tulku, being identified as the rebirth of a great bodhisattva, he underwent very, shall we say, serious training, intense training, studied excellent texts, and did some very advanced practices at a very early age. In 1971, he was 16, and he went to the Sanskrit University in Varanasi and continued doing studies there. These would have been Buddhist studies, of course. Then after that, he was sent to a monastery in Bhutan to oversee it. And by this time, of course, he was teaching also other tulkus and other highly advanced students. To go on from there, he then returned to Rumtek in 1977 as a translator for Gyalwang Karmapa. And this lasted until 1980. And then he moved to Australia. So he had picked up English before he became the translator for Gyalwang Karmapa. And having then developed a good understanding of English, he moved to New Zealand. And there he enrolled in higher education and studied comparative religion and philosophy. Then it lists all his activities in Australia and also the United States and New Zealand. He established the EVAM Institute. And then there were satellite centers, some of them in the United States. And he did a lot of other things. I'm not going to list them all. You can read or reread the biography of his. And then in 2012, he died. He was in poor health. I don't know the exact cause of his death, but he was in poor health for a number of years before he actually died. And then finally, he has authored a very large number of books, from beginning levels to very advanced books. Now, this section, there's no attribution to the author, but my best guess is this is his widow, Traleg Condro, that wrote this biography of his. And she also oversaw the completion of this book. The next is the editor's introduction to this book, and I'll be very brief. The editor says that this presents the Buddhist teachings on interdependence in our relationships, and that we depend on each other for our survival, our happiness, our material needs, our love and affection, and that benefiting others also benefits ourselves, and benefiting ourselves with a lack of self-indulgence benefits other beings. In other words, if we are happy, if we engage in virtuous activities, this will benefit from other people. It will help other people be happy and free of suffering. This is very important to remember. In other places, Traleg Rinpoche has said, if you can't love yourself, you really can't love other people. So if we know how to love ourselves and benefit ourselves, then we can truly benefit other beings. And then he says that these teachings, if taken to heart, will give us freedom to have true happiness, meaning, and fulfillment in life. To sum this up, the editor says that this book is very different from classical Tibetan commentaries, and that he sees this as, quote, an outpouring of spontaneity from the heart of Traleg Rinpoche. So these chapters are a collection of talks that Traleg Rinpoche gave over the years. And the one thing I noticed right away in chapter 1 is there are parts of it that obviously were not said by Traleg Rinpoche, that the editor or somebody else put these words in to transition from one point to another. There are four sections in the book. And the first is living a fulfilling life. The second is relationships in everyday life. The third section is emotions. And the fourth section is happiness. There are a total of 28 chapters. So each of these sections have many chapters in them. There's a total of 5 chapters in this first section, living a fulfilling life. And this evening, I'm going to discuss the first chapter, Right Vision, Big Vision. Now, in this chapter and the next chapters throughout the book, he'll use the phrase something like from a Buddhist point of view over and over and over again. And he is doing this to distinguish from when he is talking about views that non-Buddhists have, or even us Buddhists could have, that are obstacles and problems. So he is saying that to emphasize this is what is important. And this is one reason why I chose this book, is that he is contrasting the Buddhist point of view with commonly held ideas or ideals in the West, and sometimes in the East. So living a fulfilling life includes 2 aspects, and that is having the distant goal of enlightenment, and 2, having the immediate goal of, quote, do the best one can to lead a life that has some meaning and significance, and to not squander one's opportunities, end quote. And it's not helpful to see them as 2 separate goals or 2 endeavors. Like, first I'll work on my mundane life here and what's happening in it, and then later I will focus on traveling towards enlightenment. He says there are 2 possible sidetracks. One is seeing that mundane life is empty and just an illusion, that it's not important. Well, it is important unless you are a really highly advanced yogi, and you don't need to eat, you don't need to have a place to live, you don't need to have health care, and you don't need anything else, that you can just go out and live on the food of meditation or what people offer you. But I guarantee you in the United States that if you have to live on what other people offer you, you are a street person, and you're going to have difficulty practicing, concentrating on your practice. So we really have to learn how to work with mundane life successfully from a Buddhist perspective. The other mistake or sidetrack is to see that enlightenment is impossible in this life, so I'll just work towards attaining a better life next time around. So this chapter explores how we can have more meaning in our lives with both of these goals and working together with both of these goals. This is right vision, joining these two goals. He says it's big vision, which is the title of the chapter, right vision, big vision. So we need to have both the ultimate goal and our mundane concerns in mind when we are engaging in our ordinary activities. We need to keep both in mind as we are going through our ordinary day. We don't leave Buddhism on the cushion. We don't get up in the morning, practice, get up off the cushion, and now we're in the mundane world, and we left our Buddhist practice in the shrine room on the cushion. We have to give ourselves proper encouragement and feedback as we're going through our daily lives and our ordinary activities. Where we are now, or at least most of us, is that we have small vision. We're focused on what is right in front of us, dealing with that, or else we approach bigger vision in an unachievable way. The obstacle is egoic, and this is a word I had not run into before. I don't know if this is a British Australian word that would be translated into egotistic, but I'm going to use egoic. Basically, it's preoccupation with our ego and our ego desires. So this is a huge obstacle, is preoccupations and obsessions with our ego. Quote, negative thoughts, nagging doubts, thoughts of suspicion and fears and anxiety in terms of one's capacity and what we are aiming for. These are all obstacles that are created by our ego and our attachment to it. So our ego generates all kinds of thoughts, the subconscious gossip that keep us from going in the right direction. Thoughts like, it's not possible, I can't do it, maybe it's not real. He talks about that we have created these walls around us with our ego, this small vision, and we have to break out, that we've trapped ourselves in this very small world because we need to feel secure, and this small world feels secure. We need to understand ego and its obsession in order to break out, that we're trapped. We really don't have any freedom. So we have to look inward, understand ego, and this can help us break out. Big vision works this way. It challenges small vision. It challenges our ego attachment. That ego is fragile. It's easily hurt, easily wounded. And it sees from a very narrow perspective. It's fixed, it's sometimes insecure, and it's brittle. These are words that he used to describe it. And when things go badly, our ego feels threatened, and we can even fall apart. He said that's what an identity crisis is when our ego is so badly threatened and falls apart that we're not sure who we are. I remember hearing many years ago a man saying, I'm looking for myself, because he was having an identity crisis. Who am I? And I remember having a similar situation long ago before I came to Buddhism, when I realized that all the mundane things in the world that I kind of was grabbing my identity from were impermanent and I could lose them at any point. And if that was the case, who am I? If what I'm basing my identity on are these things that just can change like that, who am I? And that led to some deep introspection and at first depression. So he says that we need to stop trusting our ego so much and that we have to place our trust in our Buddha nature. He calls it the ground of our own being. And basically what this means is that we have to trust that the essential nature of our mind is Buddha, that it is beyond perfection. It has qualities of limitless loving kindness, limitless compassion, limitless wisdom, limitless joy, that this is inside of us. This is the nature of our mind, and this cannot be changed, altered in any way. And the problem is that our minds are obscured and we do not see this. We do not experience it directly. This is what we need to put our trust in. On the other hand, ego, if we place our trust in ego, our ego always sees from a negative point of view. Ego is always insecure because it has no real foundation. Gyalwang Karmapa talks about a fabricated self or a fabricated ego. And fabrication means put together from parts. And this is why our ego is so insecure, because it's just put together from parts. It's parts and pieces. The parts and pieces are impermanent, and we want them to be permanent. What we need to place our trust in is this stable ground, the ground of our being. When we do that, this keeps us from being wounded or being traumatized when things go south. That's my phrase, when things go south. Difficulties arise. Even when the possibility of problems arise, our ego can get very upset and uncomfortable. It's amazing how easy it is when something goes wrong to think, not only is this going wrong, but since this is going wrong, then that is going to go wrong. And if that goes wrong, something else much worse is going to happen. At this point, I might as well jump off a tower because my whole world is going to fall apart. But this is what ego does. It likes to have security. If we have a wider perspective, if we can put our trust in this ground of our being, then we see problems as opportunities for growth, problems as indication that we need to go in new directions. It gives us better understanding of life and ourselves and others. It helps us develop appreciation and wisdom. So this wider perspective, I like to compare it with this, that the narrow egotistic perspective is like seeing a bee in a phone booth, where the bee is a big problem. You might even panic. But if you are out in a meadow and you see a bee, it's not a problem at all. You're in a beautiful meadow. You see space and you see beauty. And it's like that. If we can have this wider view, these problems are seen more in perspective and they're not all that big. A number of times I remember going to Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche and I would say, this is a problem, da 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 da. And he would say, it's not a problem, or something like that. This isn't important. This is minor. But our ego, when we're focusing in a very narrow view, our ego makes very unrealistic demands on us and makes things blown up way, way out of proportion. And on top of that, ego is very seldom satisfied, at least not for long. What came to mind as I was preparing this talk, some of you may have heard of this, the 5 unrealistic expectations of samsara that ego has. The first is I'm the most important person in the room. And of course, everybody else in the room is thinking that they're the most important person in the room, or at least they should be. Or if not, they think that they are the worst person in the room. And it's amazing. In a room, you can get a room full of people that think they're the worst person in the room, because we can have very low opinions of ourselves. The second unrealistic expectation is I should be respected. People should treat me with respect because I'm an important person. Other people, on the other hand, have to earn my respect before I give them respect. So that's another egotistical expectation that's unrealistic. The third is other people should know what my expectations are. I shouldn't even have to tell them. It's obvious. Gosh darn it all. Why don't they understand what my expectations are? I remember overhearing this conversation of 2 co-workers, and the one said, and I told him, I don't understand why you don't understand me. And these are the kind of egotistical expectations that we bring to the table when we have this narrow view. The fourth expectation that's unreasonable is I should not be harmed in any way. And that could be as much as I shouldn't have to wait so long at a red light to make a left turn. I shouldn't have to wait so long at the grocery store to check out. They shouldn't be out of items that I want at the grocery store or any place else for that matter. I shouldn't have to drive in rush hour traffic when I'm driving in rush hour, and on and on and on and on and on like that. The fifth one is life should be fair, and I'm the one that decides what's fair or not. I'm kind of the Supreme Court here. So we bring all these expectations in, and it creates all kinds of problems. It is due to this narrow view. Quote, there's always some variety of subconscious activity informing us that we have done a bad job, not trying hard enough, could have done better, or deserved more. That kind of sums up his opinion of this ego and this subconscious gossip. So again, he goes back to what is fundamental and vital, and this is our Buddha nature and trust in it. This is expansive. It is authentic, an expansive, authentic state of mind. It is because of feeling this, believing in this, that we can have this big vision. This state of mind doesn't change. It's reliable. It's consistent. So we need to use this as an identity. Again, but we have to avoid solidifying it and thinking that this is exactly who I am. And we define ourselves with that too. We're back to being boxed in. In a different book, Tralek Rinpoche talks about a functional ego. What a functional ego is, it allows us to have an identity that is consistent so that other people can respond to us and we're predictable to other people. It allows us to navigate the mundane world. But again, we see that it is not solid and that it's fluid. I like to joke that if there really was not even a functional self, how could a person with no self use the self-service gas pump? Well, it's because we have a functional self. It helps us function. We know how, you might say, samsara works, and we're able to navigate it in a way that we are not defined by it or overwhelmed by egotistical desires. All of this is recognizing the limitations of ego and the problems with ego. So next is to become aware that there is so much beyond ego. There's a tremendous world beyond ego, this big view. And another problem of ego is that it tends to be extremely negative. It's always on the defensive, always trying to protect territory or gain more territory. And all of our negative thoughts, ego's paranoia, insecurity, unrealistic demands come from ego. The antidote is to lean into more positive things, that learning new ways of thinking, new ways of relating to ourselves and to the world. Quote, learning to inculcate positive thoughts and emotions. The planting of white seeds in the psyche is important to developing our ability to sustain the bigger vision by developing trust in our authentic, genuine state of beings. And it's interesting, he uses the state of being, and I like that because being, you might contrast it to doing. It is being ourselves. So we want high aspirations, even limitless aspirations that he talks about. Some, even Buddhist teachers, talk about, well, be more realistic. Don't have these vast goals and aspirations. By using that approach, we'll never reach our full potential. We want to have this vast view, and we want to reach the goal of becoming totally enlightened. So an idea of a limited aspiration, what came to mind when I was reading this was, believe it or not, the Red Green Show from Canada. He was a Canadian humorist and had a show on public television. It was a show about a men's club, and they had a man's prayer at the beginning of their club meeting. And the prayer went, I'm a man, I can change. If I have to, I guess. Now, this is a limited aspiration, and it's easy to fall into that type of aspiration. And it might be humorous, but it won't get you anywhere, I guess. So we need to reorient our mind. Otherwise, high or low aspirations will be of little help. Our ego sees defeat, failure, and mediocrity. So we need great expectations. We need our capabilities, capacities to be cultivated, nurtured, and grown. We want to avoid selling ourselves short. In fact, this is a form of laziness. When I came to Buddhism, I came across three types of laziness very quickly. One form of laziness is self-deprecation. Oh, I could never do that, so why should I waste my time trying? That's a form of laziness. Interestingly enough, the Tibetan word for lazy actually is lay low. I think that translates into English pretty well, laying low. We need to have clear and definite ideas of our goals, what they are. And as we progress along the path, this will help us sustain the long-term vision. And this is what it takes to overcome negative tendencies of body, speech, and mind. He then goes into a very common error that at least Westerners can fall into, and that is, oh, I had a very difficult or traumatic childhood, or I was born into poor economic situation, or I was not able to get a good education, and so on. We can find all kinds of reasons to explain why we haven't accomplished much in this life. But on the other hand, these don't need to define us. We don't have to be limited by the situation that we are born into. We're not the sum of the worst things that we have done or experienced, and we're not the sum of the best things we have done or experienced. That we want to avoid the victim mentality. A victim mentality leaves you powerless. It is, I am the way I am because of conditions that I had no control over. There's nothing that I can do about that. Therefore, I'm not going to try. Today in psychology, psychiatry, stories about post-traumatic growth, that these very difficult situations can lead to growth. I attended a awards banquet in the Minneapolis area last Friday, and the main speaker was a woman that got a Teacher of the Year award from the Minnesota, probably Department of Education. And she had a very difficult childhood. I think she was Filipino. Her father was Caucasian, and he was violent. He probably married the woman because he felt that she would be submissive and he could beat her up and abuse her, which he did. And the mother tolerated this for years. And finally, she had enough and she just left, leaving her children behind too. And then the children had to tolerate this, which they'd been tolerating already. And then he died. And then her older brother took over as head of the family. At most, she was 16 years old. And somehow or another, she got a teacher degree. And she was a fantastic teacher, or at least a speaker. But obviously, she was a good teacher too, if she got the Teacher of the Year award. So this is just one example of post-traumatic growth. When I worked in the prison, it was kind of the same way. The inmates would have a long list of excuses of why they were incarcerated. But the bottom line was that just because you're in here and just because you experienced all these things doesn't mean that you can't change. So we want to avoid this victim mentality because it leaves you helpless, hopeless, and powerless. What's really more important is having this big vision, having great expectations, wanting to go beyond your limited expectations and your past. We're capable of doing much more than what we give ourselves credit for, that we don't have fixed capacity, that our minds are limitless and we have limitless potential. And as we go through life, we can grow or we can shrink. We can go up or we can go down. We can open up or we can shut down. These are all possibilities. And we can lead a fulfilling life or not. All of this is in our hands. So we need to be aware of the past, but not let it spoil our present. When we bring the past into the present, it keeps us from seeing all the opportunities that arise in the present. We're more living in the past. I think a good way to describe this is that we are planning for the future, filling up the present, and living in the past. And there's no space in the present because we filled it up. There's no room to grow. And so for some reason or another, we keep finding ourselves in the same place over and over and over again. And perhaps eventually you kind of realize that, oh, this stinks. And that's where you learn to let go of the past. Forgiveness is a big part of this. He doesn't talk about this. Forgiveness is letting go of the past, forgiving ourselves for what we have done in the past, forgiving others for what they have done to us in the past. Carrying around the past is a very, very heavy burden. I posted this on my Facebook page a number of years ago, and it was a story. I got it off of the internet. Story about a professor. Now I've got this singing bowl here. Pretend this is a glass. And the glass was clear and it was half full of water. And so as she's walking around the room with this, the students are thinking she's going to ask, is it half full or half empty? And of course, she doesn't say that. She said, how heavy is this? Various students answered with guesses about it's so many ounces. And then she said, that's not important. What's important is how long you hold it. The longer you hold it, the heavier it gets. You hold it up for hours and hours and hours, and you might even start having tremors in your arm. The solution is, of course, to just put it down. But we carry around the past with us. We carry around all these things with us. And it's such a heavy burden, and it's so unnecessary. It prevents us from seeing what actually is occurring. It prevents us from experiencing the freshness of life, prevents us from seeing our good fortune. It keeps us from seeing how the world is supporting us. It's interesting. We see what we don't have, and we don't see what we do have. And if we can let this down and pay more attention to what's actually happening, we start seeing things that we never noticed before. I have done mindful eating here, and I've done it other places. I've even done it in the prison, where all I do is I take a singing bowl, I put it on the table next to me, and I say, we're going to eat in silence. And every few minutes, I'm going to strike the singing bowl. And when you hear that, stop eating. And when you can no longer hear it, then continue eating. I get all kinds of responses. I like to have a discussion after that. And responses are things like, well, this food tasted really good. I need to get the recipe. One inmate said this was the best prison meal I ever had. And I promise you, prison dining is not very good. I don't recommend it. The point is that you taste the food when you're not distracted, when you're not talking, when you're not thinking about the past. And listening to the singing bowl kind of cuts the thoughts. We need to quit taking for granted things in our lives and appreciate them. Taking things for granted actually dampens good feelings and increases bad feelings. And there's a lot of things in life that we can't avoid, that life is change. There's always the unexpected. There are upheavals. This is the way of samsara. And when we take things for granted, these things become more of a problem. And it can lead to feelings of depression, failure, inadequacy. Whereas if we can develop appreciation, all of this can be remedied. And actually, there is just an incredible amount in the world to appreciate. One time I wrote that there's more to appreciate in life than is possible to experience in a lifetime. If you really start paying attention to what's going on. So gratitude is very essential to our developing this proper view, this big view. And our attitude is what determines whether our life is fulfilling or not. We have to realize that we're not the person who came into the world, that our past circumstances don't define who we are. We can better ourselves. Our short-term and our long-term are not separate, that they really are two sides of the same coin, and that the spiritual path has both of these goals in mind, the immediate goal of living a fulfilling life and the distant goal of enlightenment. If done properly, following our immediate goal will help us achieve our long-term goal. To kind of sum up this chapter, and I will say this, there was a lot in there in a few short pages. But both goals need to be seen as real, he feels, that it's self-defeating to be cynical or skeptical, that this leads to despair and depression, that fundamentally, if with that skepticism and cynicism, you don't believe in yourself or anything else. And if there's nothing to believe in, there's nothing to nourish. With extreme skepticism, cynicism, doubt, and so forth, it just leads to despair and depression. On the other hand, with lofty ideals, we can infuse our life and the lives of others with joy, as affirmation, and a sense of positivity. Quote, developing a more positive attitude helps us to believe more in our own ideals and goals that we wish to help attain, allowing life to have greater meaning and fulfillment. So part of having a fulfilling life is to have a positive sense of being alive, of who you are and other people. We need to trust ourselves, trust our authentic state of being, trust that on both levels, the immediate and the absolute, that they are interdependent, and that as we progress he says it is real. Sometimes this is, presented differently, but in this book, he says, look at this as being real. And this gives us a solid foundation. It helps give us self-confidence. I want to make the distinction between taking care of oneself and self-indulgence. Self-indulgence has to do with ego and ego satisfaction. And basically, in terms of ego, if you're not satisfied before you get what you want, or not happy before you get what you want, you could put a lot of different words in there. If you don't have it before you get what you want, you're not going to be happy, at least for long after you get what you want. You're just going to want more and more because it's all impermanent anyway. This is very important. And finally, the last part, this must have been done by the editor because it says the next 3 chapters continue on this theme. Finally, the chapter ends that having this firm belief doesn't mean you can be disrespectful or intolerant of people who have different views. The question is about taking responsibility for ourselves and our own mind. And it sounds like that could open the door to saying people that are having difficulties in their life, whether it be health difficulties, poverty, maybe racial discrimination. It could be interpreted to say, well, this is all your problem. Take responsibility for it. I don't have to do anything. Maybe I can feel a little compassion. This is the attitude you're taking towards yourself. Now, when you come across someone that's homeless, someone that's sick, someone that has a disability, you do what you can to help the person. There can be many different things that you can do. It might be providing some kind of physical assistance, money, a place to stay, contributing. I prefer to contribute to charitable organizations rather than people on the street, because you don't really know what a person on the street is going to be doing with the money, if they're using it for their own benefit or using it for drugs. And so I prefer personally to give to charities. This is my own opinion, but I have been known to just give it to people on the street too. But the point is that we take responsibility for our own feelings and avoid being a victim, and realize that we have power to change, that we can always change our attitude towards the circumstances that we are facing. And that can make a huge difference in the circumstances. Like the stiff neck, I could moan and groan and complain, oh, poor me, and it would just make the pain worse. I'm not going down that road. There's some other people that attend this class and some other programs that I do that also have health problems much worse than mine, and you don't hear them complain either. It's a matter of individual responsibility, but it certainly would, to me, seem cold and heartless to say to a person that has a disability, go get a job.